So, hello and a very warm welcome to you all. My name is Mark Morley, and this is the IT Business Partner Playbook, a new series where I'll be joined every week by business partners and business relationship managers from around the globe. Now, those familiar with the series will know that our usual episodes are conversational and we don't do any form of pre-planning. The idea is to make the series as relatable and relevant to what our audience are facing on a day-to-day basis. However, as the series has progressed, there have been some themes that I'd like to dive deeper into and some challenges that I feel could benefit from further exploration. So we decided to put together some special episodes to address these challenges. One particular challenge that has not had much airtime on the podcast, but I've seen myself from within my own network, is the impact of restructuring and retrenchment on the BRM role and people that are applying for jobs and just need some support. So one person who has first-hand experience of this is James Rowbotham, who you'll remember from our episode 2. James has been seeking a BRM role for a little while now, and I've been obviously staying in touch with James to see how it's been getting on. So we thought it'd be great to share his experiences and insights in the hope that it might make the process just a little bit easier for other people that are going through the same thing. So James, thanks so much for joining me again and for agreeing to do this. Can I ask you to remind our audience of your situation when we met, and then perhaps you can tell us about your journey since then?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Mark. Great to be back, and great to see the podcast doing so well. So as listeners and viewers may remember, I've been a BRM for just over 8 years now, and I have done BRM roles for 4 different organisations. And the lattermost organisation I joined as part of a bit of a promotion, kind of next step up the ladder in my career. And very sadly, what that organisation decided to do was to completely disband the business relationship management team, business partnering team, after only 8 weeks of being in post, which was a great shock to us all. So as you say, I was ready to kind of launch into the next phase of my career, ready to dive in and get stuck in for however many years that role was I was hoping for it to last for a while, and it ended up only being 8 weeks. So complete shock, as you can imagine, not just for myself but my colleagues who were in that same boat. One of my colleagues has been a BRM for more than 13 years, and she had actually been made redundant in the early part of last year, had the summer off to look around and take stock, and then ended up joining the same company that I did and got made redundant herself after 8 weeks. So bless her, she got made redundant twice in a year, despite being absolutely fantastic at what she does. And so here we are. As you mentioned, I've been basically forced into kind of looking around for roles, applying for them out of my comfort zone a little bit. When I've changed organisations in the past, I've done so having already got BRM work and having done so from a position of strength. And I've only ever been made redundant twice in my career. So it was all very new. And that was back end of last year. And I've been having lots of interviews since then with lots of different types of organisations in different industries, different sectors. And as you say, if we can help anybody on their journey, I think you're aware of other people, not just BRMs, but project managers, BAs, solution architects. It doesn't really matter who. Times I think are quite difficult in many situations at the moment, and I think certainly we're seeing a lot of restructuring, a lot of tweaking, a lot of cost pressures because of inflation and things going on in the wider world, and the need to reset or rethink. So here I am, lots and lots of stories to tell, and hopefully they are genuinely useful for people. I've definitely learned a lot along the way. I've still not cracked it. I've not got my next BRM. I'm doing other things, and this is somebody who's been doing that job for 8 years, and I'm proud of what I've done, and I've got good feedback in the past. I've won awards, and we've done some really kind of amazing things in the organisations that I've worked for. But yet for whatever reason, I think the competition is really fierce, and it's just really difficult to get it over the line and convince a panel, also over a number of stages potentially, that you're the right candidate for them.
And I just wanted to pause quickly there, because I mean, I'm connected with hundreds, if not thousands, of BRMs around the globe, and every now and then I'll see that dreaded open to work, logo pop up on their profile, which is always a shame to see, because at that point that someone is kind of being forced into that position. It's not something they've kind of chosen to do, so they're already kind of on the back foot. And when I talk to these people, it's difficult, because as often you think, okay, well, what did I do wrong? Was I part of this problem? Especially, maybe if you weren't in the role that long. But even people that have had a good background, they've been doing it a long time, and they're kind of confident in themselves. When a whole BRM team is wiped out, you get to thinking, well, okay, well, is BRM really, is there something wrong with the role? Is it something that I should be doing? Should I look at a career change? Should I be thinking about something else? But I think one of the common things that I've seen, well, there's two things. BRM and business partnering as a capability is critically important. And this is kind of evidenced by the fact that we're working with some huge companies, household names, that are using this capability and getting fantastic results from it. There are other companies that are using business partners and business relationship managers in a different way, not in the way that we would see it. So the role is different. And so I think in those companies, there's always going to be a risk that someone will look at those roles and think, well, actually, what really are they delivering above and beyond what some of the other roles are doing, and maybe it is an excess. So I think the thing to think of, or to consider, if you have been retrenched, made redundant, if you are out of a position, it's not BRM's fault, it's not business partner's fault, it's not your fault, it's not something that you're doing wrong necessarily. It's often the way the organization is viewing that role and viewing that capability. And I would say in 9 times out of 10 that the capability isn't mature enough, executive sponsorship isn't there. And really, your role was kind of on a path to nowhere, because it just didn't have the right support. But there are companies out there that do know the real benefits of business partnering and business relationship management. So you just have to kind of stick fast, be confident in yourself, know that what you're doing is valuable, and these roles will come along. So I just wanted to jump in and say that firstly, but I'm going to hand back over to you now, James, to maybe take us through the journey that you've had since we last spoke, and just share some of the experiences and insights that you've had along the way.
Yeah, thanks for that, and you've picked up on so many good points there that I'd like to kind of unpick, if I may. So I think the first point that I would mention, which I think a number of people in this situation will find, is that there is a stigma attached to being open to work on LinkedIn and to finding yourself unemployed, and having been made redundant. And I don't think I could put it any better than you did, that ultimately there are brilliant people out there doing business relationship management. But with my most recent organization, the thing that we found is that there were people there who had simply no experience of BRM. So myself and my colleague, who I mentioned at the beginning of the pod, was educating those people on what BRM was all about.
Right.
And it was a real mess, because we had so many different people with so many different viewpoints as to kind of what BRM should be, despite us sharing the best practice. And ultimately, if BRM wasn't a comfortable fit for them, they didn't want it to be there. They didn't want to know. And there was this kind of constant justification of the value. So the thing that, again, this is another point I would recommend to kind of BRM job seekers, is, as I'm aware from my recent CBRM teachings, which I should have done years ago, but I'm really glad that I did, and I did it with yourself, Mark, and I passed. Woohoo! Thank goodness for that. That was definitely intense. But there are 3 threads of BRM: understanding the BRM context, understanding your own organizational BRM context, developing strategic relationships, and optimizing business value. And that's something that I share with people in interviews. If you don't know what BRM is, that is it in a nutshell. That's the quickest and simplest and most succinct way I can describe it to you. We were educating those people as to what BRM is and what it should be, and how you try and achieve that business value. And it was really, really difficult to do. We were basically trying to build up processes and a function from scratch. So that's something that I did with Sheffield Hallam University with my ITBP colleague Fiona Taylor. So we had a blank canvas, we had to build up a BRM function, and we were given the bandwidth to do that, and ultimately were really successful and we got accredited to ISO standards. But we had an organisation that really wanted to do BRM, was really receptive to it, and it was just a given that we would do that. Whereas the most recent organisation I was working for, it was up in the air because there had been a change at that senior level. And as you said, there just wasn't that senior buy-in, which I was really surprised at, because the most senior person within the IT organisation was experienced and had worked for a number of different organisations, but just somehow hadn't worked with IT BRMs before. So I guess the first bit of real advice I would give to people, other than what I've just mentioned, is when you're out there in that wide world and when you're seeing these roles and these opportunities come up, you have to really do your best to kind of understand what is behind the curtain, and that's not an easy thing to do. Myself and my colleagues were joining that organisation thinking that, this was brand new, this was something that was going to be around for at least a couple, if not many more years, and that everybody was on the same page right the way up to the very upper echelons of the company. And ultimately what happened was the first even slightest indication of any cost pressures, it was just the easiest decision to make. People didn't understand it. People weren't comfortable that BRM is actually a bit grey between the black and white, and that it is quite difficult to articulate the value, and that the value is both qualitative and quantitative, So I think that's the most unfortunate thing, is that despite having worked for organisations that really do value that BRM role and really do, I guess, not just understand the value that's coming back, but really appreciate it, like really are happy that they're paying you that salary to deliver for the business, this one organisation just wouldn't even let it get started. They just decided right from the word go. I think the phrase that was used was, there aren't enough big projects on next year. I think that just kind of demonstrates the really kind of narrow mindset. And the real unfortunate thing is that the business were absolutely lapping us up, and were really, really key that we were there and building those relationships. So I think the first thing is, I was over the moon when I got that role, and you always wonder if the grass is greener on the other side, and is it too good to be true? Unfortunately, in that situation, it was. But at the same time, do I regret making the decision? Probably not. Despite it having been quite intense and quite stressful, and I've been having to do lots of different jobs that aren't IT BRM roles, and that has been quite liberating and quite refreshing in a way. There's been a couple of kind of dark and scary moments, but actually it has taken me out of my comfort zone a little bit. I think the thing that it really has made me realise is that as you said, I think, did we have our 20-year BRM anniversary a few weeks ago? So the BRM Institute and BRM quality in itself is still relatively young if you compare it to project management and other areas maybe. Out there in the wider world, even with these huge organisations, there are still pockets that just have absolutely no understanding of what it is and what it's out there to achieve. And if they do have that understanding, there are some of them who just simply aren't willing to take that gamble. Is the wrong phrase, but invest in it, I guess, is what I'm saying. So that was my first bit of advice, and I don't know the answer to that. I guess the only way around it is to reach out to people who work for that organisation. Before I joined, I read some Glassdoor reviews and did a bit of research on what it was like to work for that organisation, and I think most of them, the reviews were okay. And it turns out, unfortunately, the work culture was quite toxic, and they were just used to there being a really high churn, and that you were totally dispensable, which again is just something I'm not used to. The organisations that I worked for previously do have valued the contribution that all of the IT staff can make. So yeah, that's a long-winded way, but I think it's a really important point to touch on, is that when you do have a look around, be really prepared that a lot of these organizations think they might understand what IT BRM is, but it's quite common, I think, or I would imagine, certainly in my experience of having done lots of recent interviews, quite common for you to be the one educating them on what it's about. And then when you look at that description, that job role, and you dive into their expectations of what an IT BRM is, you might be on completely different pages, completely different planet. Okay.
I think also, I mean, you mentioned in a previous conversation, one of your interviews, you'd met with the CEO, which is, I guess, not common in interviews, but also, with BRMs, there are times where with a strategic role, you are going to be engaging with C-suite people. So if you get the opportunity within an interview to meet with these senior guys, it's good to gauge their feedback, because we've seen so often that you do have someone in a leadership position that strongly believes in BRM and business partnering, but then that person goes, and because there's been so much focus on the role rather than the organizational capability, that if a person does move away, someone comes in and they're not familiar with the role, the BRM as a culture is not there. So it's just seen as the role, and if that person's not familiar with it, often CIOs like to come in and change things to kind of prove their value right away. So there is, even if you talk to people that are in the role already and they say, yeah, things are going really well and we've got leadership buy-in, it's what leadership has brought into it. Because if it's just one person, then that's when you've got a danger. If more of the leadership team are brought into it, that's when you know it's going to be a safer environment for you to join.
Indeed. And I think the next example I would give, which is I found has been a really interesting one, is I've recently been through a 3-stage process, and I got to the 3rd stage, and I met with 2 different sets of people, and one guy was consistent in the first 2 stages, and there were 2 different guys as part of that as well. So 3 people throughout the first 2 stages, and they all wanted me. They were all really happy with my examples and my track record and everything else, and they were really clear. We were in total agreement, total harmony of what I could do, what the role was meant to be. And then I met the C-suite, the top dog, and he had a completely different vision for the role that his colleagues did within that organization. So they were completely misaligned. And this chap wanted a BRM who was a developer, a solution architect, a BRM, probably a transformation specialist, and a project program manager. And I was kind of sat there thinking, like, do these people really exist? They might. Are you willing to pay for them? And also, how much of their time are they going to be spending doing development work? How much of their time are they going to be spending doing business relationship management work, etc.? So that just blew my mind, really. And
the fact that you can have, sorry to interrupt, but the fact that you can have such different views from people that are only one level apart is quite incredible.
And the chap who really wanted me, who was that level below, said that unfortunately this has happened before, again, which are just was it's really important. I think it's quite unprofessional in a way, but I guess this kind of leads me on to my next point, which is that it is quite scary when you're going through these processes and you're being asked to be to the kind of the utmost standards of professionalism that you can possibly be, and that when you're going through, and I guess people all over LinkedIn and all over podcasts like this will totally, this will resonate, and I'm probably stating the obvious, but you really do get poorly treated and get unprofessionally treated in a number of different ways. To give you an example, so one interview process that I went through, I interviewed with a senior guy, at about 2 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. Lots of people had told me that we needed to get together really quickly because lots of other people liked me, and he was jetting off to the Maldives on holiday, so we had to get something sorted. If I'd had £1 for every time the Maldives was mentioned, I would have been a rich man. But anyway, he looked me in the eye at the end of this interview and said, "You will definitely know by the close of play today." And just absolutely nothing. So you can imagine how many times I was looking at my phone all weekend. And it was I actually got the role, but it was weeks after that it all kind of, do you know, to me, like a senior person dealing with business stakeholders and the business and trying to manage their expectations, I just found it so poor. And ultimately, unfortunately, that was the organisation that we've just been speaking about, where where it was a bit of a toxic culture and they didn't treat you with that kind of professionalism. But and again, there's nothing you can do about it when you get made redundant. You are at the mercy of these processes and these people. A lot of these roles are 3-stage processes, and I just don't know why. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I can understand 2, probably. I do think a big part of it is almost kind of laziness or reluctance to get people's diaries together, or kind of not want to interview more than a few candidates. But I think that's quite common, and my heart does sink when people say it's a 3-stage process. And the worst bit is when people say, I think it's going to be a 3-stage process. Hang on a minute. So you don't even know your own interview yet, and yet you want to kind of take up my time, because you're the candidate. It's your time, it's your money, you're traveling, you know what I mean? And so that kind of lack of respect from the start, that lack of professionalism, I think is a real warning sign. To flip it on its head, if I'm going to be positive about some of those things, I did interview with an organisation where they had a 1-stage process, and I found that so refreshing.
Right.
What they actually did was let themselves down. They told me that they would let me know by the end of the week. So come Friday, I was waiting, absolutely nothing. Followed up with them on the Monday, didn't hear anything. And on the Tuesday, they got back to me with like an auto reject. But what had happened is, and this would be like a real piece of advice I would give to people, at the end of your interviews, ask that question, do you have any concerns about employing me? And word it however you want. But I've been scared in the past sometimes to ask that question, but I think it is the most important question. I've asked that question, and one of the bits of feedback which I get, which I'm going to ask the community to help me with, is succinctness. And you'll know from this podcast already that it's my biggest challenge. And I totally recognise that. But one organisation did tell me they felt I could be more succinct, so I kind of knew really early on that I probably wasn't going to the next stage. But other organisations have told me about the concerns, and we've been able to address them there and then, rather than them going off and kind of feeding back together on the quality of my interview. We were able to dive a bit deeper into kind of some much more meaningful, meatier topics. So that would be a really big piece of advice. Don't be scared about asking that question. You might get absolutely nothing back, but in my recent experience, people have been quite happy to share what their concerns are, and you're going to get a decent feeling as to kind of whether or not you know that you're aligned, or whether or not they want to take you forward. So that would definitely be a bit of advice I would share.
I think the good thing about doing it there and then is that people don't have a chance to go away and think about, I should generate this kind of response, or it's just an honest, open, this is my thoughts, and it gives you something to work on. Because as we've spoken about, as tough as this whole process can be, you do have to take the positives from it, and you can see it as some kind of learning experience. And if you get that immediate feedback from people that, this is what we thought, then at least it gives you something to go away and then kind of work on or reflect on, which is handy. But when you don't get anything and then there's silence afterwards, and I can unfortunately, I've not been in this position for a long time. So I do really sympathize people that, you go to these interviews, you put everything into it, you're really showcasing yourself, you're prepared for it, putting yourself out there, and then to get nothing back for weeks on end, it must be, soul destroying. And when you have to go through this process again and again and again, even the chirpiest, the most optimistic of people, and I think I would count you among them, James, is that you're always smiling, always thinking positively. After a while, you must, it's tough, isn't it?
It is, and I've got a few more examples that I've thought on, like just on the back of what you've said. So I'll start with the positives. So coming back to that kind of any concerns question, there were 2 scenarios where it did throw up some real positives. So the first one, that 1-stage recruitment process that I mentioned, the company said to me, we have got a real concern that you're too big for us. So you work for these big companies, you work for Airbus, you work for Babcock. We just think you're you're too big for us. And my response was, well, I've been a trustee for your organisation in the past. I applied for the role, and I wouldn't do that if I didn't want it.
Yeah.
The salary is kind of not exactly where we're at, but I can definitely make it work, and I can make it work for a number of years. So, I want to be your IT BRM. As it goes, that wasn't enough to kind of convince them that the fit was right. And I'll get it. I totally understand it. It wasn't perfect fit, but at least we had the opportunity to discuss that kind of topic. The second positive was one of the chaps who was kind of part of the, he was essentially like joint hiring manager. He said, in a similar vein, really, I just don't think that we're as sexy as nuclear submarines, for example, that you've worked with. And I said, nobody said nuclear submarines were that sexy. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm really proud that I've contributed to kind of keeping us safe amongst the world. But at the same time, the organisation that I was applying for, I was totally bought into what they were there to do. And I totally thought that I could make a difference. So it was more their kind of perception, if you like, was more kind of their bias that was being reflected back into me. I couldn't convince them in the end that, that we had that alignment, but at least we're starting to get a feel for people's reservations. And if you're not going to convince them during that interview process, then what else can you do? Unless you're kind of given the chance to demonstrate it, in situ. But again, so the other thing that I think is another example that I would give you is that the interview processes and interview questions themselves have generally been reasonably consistent, but I've also had some ones. So I had one organisation that asked me to describe my positives in like 3 one-word answers, which again, just like found baffling. And also my negatives I work on, it felt a little bit kind of David Brent in The Office, we're going to be friends. So kind of, and again, like rather than looking at my CV and all of the feedback from my stakeholders and all of the things that I'm really proud of, you want me to say that I'm collaborative. I don't know, what words would you use? I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. And also, what real benefit have they got understanding those 3 words? I mean, how much can it tell you about a person? So it does feel a little bit about, we've got some interviews, questions out of a cracker, and this is what we'll use. Yeah.
And I think the thing is that it is really difficult to showcase why you are so brilliant. It really is difficult. Coming back to a point you mentioned, nothing throughout this kind of journey in my life has made me in any way doubt how brilliant I think I am. And that may sound like super, super arrogant. But it's not meant to be. I just really do believe in kind of the differences that I've made. I know work ons, absolutely, and that's why I want to kind of continue evolving. It's why I did my CBRM qualification. It's why I volunteered for the BRM Institute. And again, I would encourage people to do that. It's because you speak to more experienced people, or you speak to less experienced people, but with really brilliant ideas, and it helps you to evolve. And actually, being made redundant and doing other jobs that I've done has made me, has exposed me to kind of different ideas and opportunities and experiences. So yeah, I think that that kind of next piece of advice would be really have a think about how you can best showcase your talents and your experience in your CV. The feedback that I get is I'm not succinct enough, and I do find it a real challenge. So to kind of give you an example of a good example that I think comes across is, myself and an IT business partner colleague were supporting our stakeholders within our sector, and one year we got more than £10 million worth of IT requests through the pipeline, and together we managed to whittle it down to in the region of around 1.4 million of approved spend for that year.
Wow, that's an incredible difference.
I really do think it did make a difference, Mark, honestly, because, it showed that we were really able to kind of work with the business to do some prioritization. We had the relationships with the sponsors who were able to kind of say, yes, we're going to proceed with that. No, we're going to kill that off. And we're accountable for that as sponsors in the business. And it showed that we knew our business inside and out. We really through the topics. We'd help them to develop those ideas through the pipeline, mature requirements, mature the outcomes and the benefit that we were hoping to achieve for those. So in terms of the STAR technique, here was the situation, £10 million worth of requests. That's a real challenge. That's never going to get approved. What did we do? We worked with the business. We used our, first thread of BRM. We understood the context. We used our strategic relationships and we focused on value. We focused on what was the most to the business. And we got there. And what was the result? A pipeline that reflected what the business needed for that year to really make a difference in terms of delivering, their kind of business strategy and their business capability. So that's kind of one that I've kind of landed on, and I think it's quite a good and useful and quick one. But
absolutely,
yeah,
and it shows. Just in that one example, not only the value of you as a person, as a team, but as the capability. What other team would have come to that conclusion? What other team would have prevented those additional costs going through the pipeline? The fact that you've had the trust, your credibility, people really had to have trust in you and realize you know what you're talking about, that you've got the business IQ and you've got the provider IQ. So the immense amount of trust, so that you've kind of had that impact on the business and the bottom line of the business is really incredible, I think.
And absolutely, Mark. And the hardest part of BRM, as we've alluded to, is justifying the value and demonstrating the value. And ultimately, what we were able to do throughout the course of that year is deliver value, in its form. Throughout one of the interview processes, I spoke to some BRMs who said that they found it incredibly difficult to get any airtime at all with their stakeholders. And I've been in that boat before. It's a real challenge, and you've really got to fight hard and really show the business why they need to talk to you almost, and how you can help their problems. But, that example really does, I think, demonstrate our ability and that kind of relationship side. It was so strong, and we put a lot of hard work into sitting down with the business and going through all of these problems and understanding how they all knitted together.
Yeah.
And big things that we did was work on that kind of business capability roadmap. We understood throughout that kind of 10 million how everything knitted together, what could wait, what could get killed off, what get morphed into one topic, and all of those different things. So I think, again, that's and feel free to steal that example if you've done a similar thing, and be my guest.
Yeah.
The challenge that I have found, which again is potentially even more useful to people, is that succinctness. I don't think BRMs are absolutely extraordinary people, and I think you've got to. It's so intense. I actually think since I've been made redundant, I've been less stressed.
Sure.
In a weird way.
Yeah.
I don't bite my nails anymore. I stop doing that, which I think indicative of the bizarrely indicative of the situation that I'm in. But it is a stressful role, definitely. And if you are a BRM, usually you really care about what happens to the business. And if it doesn't work out, you kind of take that with you.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think I'm not succinct. I think it's because I'm so passionate, and because I think storytelling is such a big part of BRM. If you can't tell the business's story, you're not going to get that value out of it at the end. You're not going to have that positive outcome, because it could just be dismissed. Oh yeah, well, Joe blogs on the dockyard or wherever. That problem doesn't sound that big to me. Could they really be much more productive with better use of it? Absolutely, yes, they could. And by the way, I've seen it firsthand for myself. And I think we're really privileged as BRMs that when we meet with those stakeholders, when they do share with us their problems, and when they do really articulate it and help us to understand the problem, that kind of gives us the launch pad, if you like, to go away and to try and tackle that with our IT colleagues. Yeah. And if you can demonstrate that in an interview, I think you're in a good place.
Yeah.
I think one of the things, sorry, Mark, you were going to say something there.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm just, as you're talking there, with someone like yourself who is passionate, really wants to make a difference, really wants to be helping the business with a strategy, helping shape the demand of the provider. When you're in an interview, or even before then, if you're looking at job postings, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn all the time. Whenever I see a job posting, I'll share it. I mean, I know a lot of people like yourself are looking for roles, so I always try to share these opportunities. But a lot of them many that we look at are not real BRM roles, and you can tell that as soon as you look through the job description, look at what they're doing, look at the skills that they're requiring. You think, okay, this is not a BRM role. When, as someone who's looking for a job and obviously needs employment, how picky have you been when you're looking at these roles where you think, okay, this is not really what I'm looking for, but I'll give it a go? And there's always a chance that someone like yourself, who you've got a lot of experience, that you might be able to bring that into the new business and actually help them shape the BRM role, so elevate it and mature it. There's always that opportunity, or there's always that potential. But I guess there's also the potential that you're going to move into a role they see as a tactical role. They've got an idea of what you're going to do, and it's never going to be more than that. It's quite a risk, and there's a potential trade-off. So when you're looking at roles, how much of that do you have in your mind?
It's a really good question, Mark. And the honest truth is, I've not been hugely picky, and that's because of the situation that I'm in. I've got bills to pay. I need my next role. But you're absolutely 100% spot on. And the other thing to say on that, to kind of add to that, is that a lot of these job descriptions and job profiles have been copied and pasted. So some of them do look like pure archetypal BRM roles, in practice. They do look like they're strategic and they say all of the right things. But when you actually come to doing the interview, like the examples we touched on earlier, you very quickly realize that actually these people aren't looking for a BRM at all.
Yeah.
And so I think I found that to be quite frustrating. And again, it feels like a total waste of your time. But I have absolutely no issue with people being quite kind of in those kind of ad hoc order taker type levels of BRM maturity. Same with kind of in terms of kind of tactical BRMs. But the thing I do struggle with is when people don't accept that, or don't recognize it, or admit that, should I say, that they're in that position in terms of their maturity, and that they're ultimately kind of wanting to kind of move up the ladder, or even that they want to kind of stay in that position, but I think where people are trying to sell that they're looking for that kind of level 5 strategic partner role, and they're kind of much lower down, I find that really difficult, because we all know how difficult it is to get to trusted advisor, strategic partner. It is really difficult, and it is really difficult to stay there. But I think if I've asked a few organizations, where do you think you are at in terms of your maturity? And some said, oh yeah, kind of like medium to high. I was sat there thinking, absolutely not. Like, we're already not having the same conversation, and you just have to be honest. Like I said at the beginning, I've worked for organizations where there was no BRM function at all, and we kind of were able to work our way up with the right support and with the kind of the right hard work and competency. But yeah, it's a really big challenge. It really is. One organization that I talked to, which was really refreshing and really positive, just basically said, we're not really sure what BRM is, but we are pretty sure that we need one. And they wanted for it was kind of certainly pan-Europe, and they said, yeah, you can tell us, you've been for however many years, you share with us your stakeholder feedback, share with us the examples of what you kind of did. I mean, ultimately they didn't recruit in the end. I've seen the job on LinkedIn quite recently. It's been kind of re-sent out and re-promoted, so I'm kind of not going for it again. They know where I am if they want me. But yeah, unfortunately, Mark, when you're in this position, you can't be that picky, and you do have to be prepared, unfortunately, to waste your time. If I put lots and lots of credit to an organisation like Babcock, who I worked for 2.5 years, incredibly mature in terms of their BRM, right the way, end to end, right the way from that kind of ideation phase and that kind of having those idea conversations, through to kind of pipelining the activities and prioritizing, really good governance in place, and really good really kind of good understanding and assessment of value, really good program management, so kind of always understanding where things are in terms of delivery, and then kind of revisiting things at the end. Did we the outcomes that we wanted, productive utilization with the business? And I think that I obviously made the decision to leave because I got what I thought was a better offer. What I actually realise now is that level of maturity is really quite rare. It can be done, and that is an absolute huge credit to my former managers who set that BRM function up. Kylie as that, they worked incredibly hard to take BRM best practice and implement it exactly as it says on the tin. The good is for anybody out there is that when you do that, although it's hard work, actually you can get really good, fully functioning BRM, and you can get all of those things that we aspire to achieve from our kind of BRM, qualifications and teachings. In the 3 threads, you can definitely achieve that if you put all of the right things in place. It's not perfect, but nobody is perfect, and it never can. But if you want to get to that kind of level 4 trusted advisor, level 5 strategic partner, it can be done if you do BRM best practice, for sure. Which is why it's such a shame that so many organizations aren't doing it.
Yeah. And I think as BRMs, the kind of, I wouldn't say the fault lies with us or people in the role, but I think there is so much focus on the role that when people are in the role, they take care of their own relationships. They've got their own partners they work with, but making it a culture, trying to impact the culture of a business to make sure that this goes outside of the role, outside of the function. Because that's the thing. It's the executive buy-in, and I know we mentioned this before, but it's difficult if you don't have access to those executives. It's very hard to impact people that you don't have direct relationships with. If you can find other influencers within the business that can kind of help elevate the role, that's a good thing. But I think without the executive buy-in, it's always going to be a very, very difficult sell. And you can do the role as well as you can. You can do all the best practices, all the great things that you do. But if the right executives are not aware, then you just have that one change of person above you, and all the cards come falling down, which is a real shame. And we've seen it in many organizations, an alarming number, surprising number. Big organizations that have huge teams, 30, 40, 50 BRMs that suddenly are just wiped out because someone else comes in with a different idea, doesn't understand what BRM or business partnering really is. And then as I say, the cards come down, and it's such a shame, because as you said earlier, in even the role where you were entrenched, your business partners were like, no, stay, we need you. This is working really well. We can't kind of do this without you. But unfortunately, because it's not been a cultural thing, it's not organization wide, that it's, I guess as BRMs, my hope that people are in the role, just do as much as you can to promote the value of BRM. So it's not just within your own organization, but just as, within the industry and even outside. You just do your best to promote what it is you're doing and the value that you're bringing. That helps everyone else.
That's probably, it's such an interesting point, Mark. Again, kind of coming back to Babcock, which is best practice as far as I'm concerned. I was so lucky. I never ever got rejected by anybody at C-suite level, and anybody at MD level, anybody at that kind of leadership level below C-suite. Nobody ever turned their back on me, or kind of didn't reply to an email, or didn't reply to a Teams chat, or pick up the phone. And that is really, really unusual. And I think that really does highlight the kind of the culture of an organization.
Yeah.
I think I have also worked for organizations where I wasn't kind of rejected or ignored, but there was lots of resistance.
Right.
And again, tough place to be, but that's one where I think if you are given the time, you can get there. But you're right, there's no point fighting that resistance if you haven't got that executive one. The thing that is really interesting is, would people do this with something like project management, for example? would people kind of go, all right, well, we're not going to adopt Prince2 best practice or some kind of other management methodology. We're going to do it completely different, or we're going to do it at kind of 50%, It would never happen in a million years. And I know BRMs right the way across our community that you and I both know, who probably have saved their organizations enormous amounts of money through, and this is something that Jeremy has picked up on in the past as well. If you're a BRM, having that understanding of your business and understanding where you've got 10 applications that are doing the same thing, or you've got an obsolescence issue that's really going to impact the business quickly, or they've embarked on a journey to adopt a particular tool, but it's only literally going to do 50% of what they want it to do, and then there's going to be a whole other category of requirement that's completely missing, and that you're going to need to really pick up and solve the problem really quickly. Again, that's something where you can justify your salary 10 times over. And this sounds like really, as I suppose, facetious, I guess, but it might be the wrong word, but on one of my leaving cards, a colleague who I worked with really closely said, we wouldn't have got half the stuff done without you over the 2.5 years. So in my mind, if I'm going to flip that on its head, what he's saying to me is we got double the work done together in 2.5 years. So we multiplied everything by 2. Okay, so that's a pretty good return, I think. And actually what we did was work really well together, hand in glove, me and him with the business, and we were able to kind of unblock huge amounts of issues, really high volume of issues, just by getting to a position of being able to accept the risk. So we worked on requirements, we worked on why things were tricky and why they were blocked. And we got to a stage where we could actually give the business the approval for the things that they wanted, whether it be an IT security issue or something similar. Yeah, we could square away, so we could place orders for things. We could square away the IT security aspect by putting, by having a plan on data management plans and security plans and other things. And we could achieve the deadlines that we needed to. But that can be really difficult because you might have a security person who's really, understandably, coming from a position of, well, I've got to say no because it could be a security breach if we don't do it properly. You've then got the business who are kind of saying, give us what we want. We know it's fine. We just need to be getting on with it. And then you've got a bit more in the middle who's kind of joining the two parts of the jigsaw to making it totally compliant, giving everybody what they need and giving them that B word, giving them the value. So I think that is where you can make an absolutely huge difference, but you can't achieve it without knowing the business really well, knowing your provider IT department really well, and having that executive buy-in. You're right, you just can't do it. And how do you get that if you haven't got it? It's a really good question. I think all you can kind of do is keep going and keep demonstrating the difference you're making.
I think part of it comes from, because we always ask BRMs kind of how do you demonstrate your value? How do you show people what you're doing? And it's often it's difficult to answer, because if you've got a project manager, he can show you in a few minutes what projects he's been involved in, how they've completed on time or in budget. There's different roles you can look at where it's very easy for them to put their finger on, this is what I've done and I can show you. For a business relationship manager or a business partner, you're helping those people achieve those targets. So you might not have your own targets or your own metrics, but you've got everyone else's. But I think that's probably something that BRMs and business partners should put more effort into, I guess, is shouting from the rooftops, taking credit for things. This is what we've enabled, this is what we've done. We should let everyone know about it, because I think that's the only way. If the people at the top kind of get wind of these things and see, okay, well, actually, even if the CIO changes, we're not letting these guys go, because if we did, all these things wouldn't have happened. So I think that's probably something that as BRMs or business partners you can do to kind of secure your role a little bit, is make sure you do demonstrate or show credit for things that you've done. Make sure everyone knows about it. And we've seen, like Purdue University in the US, they do quarterly review reports on BRM, so they're publishing this thing company wide. So there's no doubt from anyone in the company. No one asks what BRM does because they know it's in a report and they can see it. And I think with someone like that, you're not going to get a change of leadership resulting in BRM going away, because everyone is too aware of the value. So I think that's maybe one of the things that we can do as BRMs, is just do a better job of showing people what we're doing. And everyone's like, the thing you mentioned about saving, £9 million. I mean, that's a massive amount of money and it's going to pay many salaries. So we need to make sure that people are aware of these. And as Jeremy mentioned, if you look at the amount of projects that are coming through the pipeline, the amount of money they would require, but the amount they managed to stop because they weren't going to generate value, or they're competing with other projects. These are the things that we kind of need to demonstrate. And I know with Jeremy at Rolls-Royce, they do a good job of doing that. So I think that's another reason why the function is safe there, because they're making sure that everyone realizes and recognizes what BRMs are doing. So for someone who's applying for a BRM role, that doesn't help. But for those that are in a BRM role, please shout from the rooftops, make sure everyone knows what you're doing, because it could end up safeguarding your role in the future.
Definitely. When I was at Sheffield Hallam University working with Fiona, who I previously mentioned, we did a BRM customer satisfaction survey, and it was quite a scary thing to do. And the feedback was overwhelmingly positive, and that was in quite a short space of time. And there was definitely still some work to go. And there were some relationships that needed some more work, but the feedback was extremely positive. And so the business was saying, please stay, please keep going, please keep maturing things, and please keep working with the IT provider domain to help us to kind of meet our needs, and we can showcase that together. We can kind of get there. So I would imagine there's very few organizations out there that don't need that BRM role. And you're absolutely right, Mark. One of the examples that I give in interviews of a really kind of positive BRM intervention is something that I was involved in as a project team that we won an award for. I had the sponsor of that project requesting that we do a demonstration to another C-suite colleague, because he was with the tool and because it was having such a positive impact on the ground of the business. And again, that's not a quantitative figure, but it's somebody kind of saying, I'm so happy with what the IT department have done, and we're making use of it here, and we should also be adopting it across the organization.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think it can kind of get any clearer than that, really, can it? The IT department have done a really good job, and the biggest challenge is to make sure that value diffuses and expands across the organization. So again, the STAR technique, we had a business problem as an IT project team, which the BRM was integral to kind of keeping on track and making sure the requirements were really clear.
Yeah.
What the action that we took was we did all of those things. We made sure that the requirements were clear and that the IT department could deliver against those requirements, deliver those outcomes. What was the result? An award-winning pioneering new tool for the organisation that costs thousands of pounds and will potentially save millions, not only in productivity, but also in avoiding fines and managing risk. That's like a perfect example, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, really, if I was going to do my time all over again, I would, and I got made redundant again tomorrow, I would work through all of those examples and all of those things that you've done. It still might not be enough. I went for an interview with an insurance company, and what I actually did throughout the interview was I went way overboard. I did loads of slides, loads of content, and it was like a starter gun went off, and I went at 100 miles an hour, just threw everything at them. And I very, very learned my lesson on that one. If I'd been on the other end, I would have been like, who's the Tasmanian devil that we're in? Yes. I mean, I must have had a few coffees, I think, before that. So that was roughly one thing I would never do again. But the thing that was really interesting with that one was they were, in insurance, evidently, they use blockchain quite a bit,
right?
Because it's, it fits quite well. The data can although I think you can kind of I think it can be hacked. But the data has generally got good integrity and can be tracked and all those kind of good things. I still don't fully understand it, but before the interview, I'd kind of got a reasonable understanding of it. But I could see during this interview that because I'd not done anything with blockchain before, this on the panel just was not interested at all.
Yeah.
But, kind of kudos for examples of things where I had absolutely no idea what it was, what the IT solution was, but I'd still managed to help deliver it. But again, there are going to be times, and again, I know I'm stating the obvious to people who are listening, but there are going to be times where people will, because you've not worked in that industry or because you've not had hands-on experience with that tool, even though as a BRM you don't really need to. I mean, I've worked in higher education, defence, and for a big software company. Before that time, I'd never worked in any of the organizations before, and I had to somewhere. So again, like if I was going to give somebody a load of credit, I would give Sheffield Hallam University a load of credit because they took a chance on me. I'd barely done, I'd worked on a few IT topics before. I'd done a little bit of development, but they gave me my kind of first chance, and we all need that somewhere. What I would say is, as a candidate, if you're getting rejected on the basis that you've not dabbled in something before, do you really want to work for those people? Because again, that kind of shows that they're not really that interested in you evolving and growth, learning and taking risks. They're just, and BRM, there is an inherent risk with BRM. You will do things that don't always succeed, but a good BRM spends a lot of time trying to understand the risk, trying to make sure that anything that we're delivering is a really good fit. I've been involved in topics before where we've been a year or two in, and I've quickly realized that actually this is not the right solution anymore. We've spent a lot of time and we need to kill it off. But a good BRM will recognize that, and instead of kind of keeping going, we'll say, guys, you'll need to start, like, this investment start. The business has changed, or the problem has changed, or what have you. So again, I think that's an example of where you adapt with the times, but some organizations just are simply not prepared to take a punt on you. And there was a recruiter. I've talked to a lot of recruiters recently, as you can imagine. One guy was saying that he's been working with people who will not even interview you unless you've got a 2-1 from a Russell Group university. And he said, I just thought these times were behind us. I just that actually your CV kind of half speaks for itself, and that people realize that there are such things as late developers, or that, you're a BRM, your skill set might not lie in whatever. Do you know what I mean? And again, that's no criticism of anybody who's worked really hard to get a 2-1 and done a really good job. Absolutely fair. And you should get every kind of, opportunity that gives you. But I also think that there is quite in my experience, and maybe this is just my kind of thick skin with the rejections that I've had, but I do think there is quite a narrow mindset out there. And I think with all the cost pressures and things that are going on in the world, people are just not prepared to take risks at the moment.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately, with the advent and pervasiveness of AI, I've heard that CVs, it's at least one stage before a person looks at your CV. So it's just they run it through the algorithm. Computer says no, you're out of luck, and it's a shame because, especially as a role like BRM, it's not quantitative. It's you've got to be able to speak to the person to see what kind of person they are. Do they have empathy? Do they have these interpersonal skills? That's something really that's not going to leap out of a CV, and especially not into the mouth of an AI. So it is a shame that that is hampering things. And I think, to be fair, there are a lot of people looking for jobs, and so I guess there are a lot of CVs to go through. But with roles like this, you need someone to be looking at them and giving them the time of day that they deserve, because ultimately they're going to end up hiring the wrong person, or they could have hired someone better. So.
Absolutely. And if I was going to give anybody advice in that regard, I have put my CV through ChatGPT. I think there are other things you can do, like you say, Mark, aren't there? You can put your CV through the AI shrubbery, as it were, and see how it would fare. But I've got interviews for roles where my CV was 6 pages long. I think it's currently 4 at the moment. Could I put it down a bit more? Maybe, but I think 2 sides of A4 is probably not too bad. And I've got everything on there. I've got my qualifications, I've got stakeholder feedback, I've got appraisal information, I've got the whole lot in there, and it seems to do okay. But you're absolutely right. It is quite brutal out there at the moment. In terms of advice for people, so I in the past I have reached out to people who worked for the company before and kind of said, this role has come up in the IT department or in your team.
Yeah.
Tell me and give me any more insight. If the hiring managers aren't offering you the opportunity to discuss it with you ahead of time. I've listened to people before, and some people have kind of given me some kind of nuggets of insight.
That's very good, yeah.
One person even said, I was actually doing that role on a temporary basis until I moved into a different one, and they're advertising it now. So that was quite interesting. So I must admit, I've not really got much kind of fruit from that. Some organisations like the NHS, for example, I know that that in many situations they will encourage you to speak to the hiring manager before you even submit your CV, which I think is like a really good thing. And of course, some people have got the time to do that, some don't. Yeah, it's really difficult making your CV stand out and making it kind of concise and yeah, not something that will get churned out by some kind of AI algorithm. I don't think I've cracked that one yet, but I've been getting plenty of interviews, so hopefully that's
what else do you do? Because obviously you're still going through the process, and we've stayed in touch, and it pains me to see that you've had to go through this process so often, and you get good feedback, and you think, okay, this one's going to land, and then it doesn't for whatever reason. So it's a tough process. But going forward, how do you kind of prepare yourself? Where do you look for jobs? How do you get ready for it? What is your process?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is almost definitely always the place to go. In my experience, I think all of the roles are on there, whether they're on Indeed or other websites as well. They probably are, but LinkedIn seems to be the kind of the oracle in terms of job hunting at the moment. I will use definitely will use Wikipedia, definitely use ChatGPT to do my research. I think one of the biggest challenges for BRMs is that when you're going for roles, you're hoping to demonstrate to your prospective hiring manager how you are strategic. And not many organizations have either a strategy or even an IT strategy. And when they do have one, IT usually gets 1 or 2 sentences in there. So it might say, excuse me, yes, we definitely want to do something with AI or cloud or IPI or what have you. But that doesn't really give you very much. So that is a big challenge. I think you can get there. I think if you use a combination of Wikipedia, ChatGPT, also do a Google search of the company and click on the news filter and see what's happening in recent news. That's a really good way of kind of going back. And there's usually lots of IT stories in there that you can pick up on, whether it be acquisitions that the company have made or software tools that they've selected for a particular problem. So that's a really good way of kind of mining your way through those IT topics. As I say, reaching out to people who already work there. There's some of the ways that I try and build up that picture of kind of IT requirement. But it's not easy. Even with all of the AI and all of the tools that we've got to hand, there is an element of you still going into that conversation fairly blind. If you've got a good understanding of the strategy, then that's obviously a hugely powerful thing. Understanding where they're trying to get to in 2035, or certainly the values I've found have been useful. One organisation that I interviewed for recently had 3 values, and one of them was actually digital, which I found really refreshing. And it did talk to that point. It did talk a lot about how they want to be digital by default and how they wanted to take advantage of data at their fingertips and how they wanted to consolidate tools and really get the most out of their IT. So that was a really good launch pad for a conversation in that interview. But again, some won't even mention IT in any of their kind of supporting documentation. So that's where those probing questions really come in. That's where you really need to try and get people talking about themselves. I always find interviews tend to seem to go well if the panel are talking about themselves and talking about the organisation, and then if you kind of tag on to that kind of point, your example of where that's going really, then yeah, and then hopefully you've got a fighting chance. But again, I've not got the job, so who am I to say?
Not for the one of trying, and not for your capability, I'm sure. So one thing I've been thinking, just as we've been talking, I think it'd be really handy. So Jeremy did a blog post way back when, which continues to be the most popular one on our website. If you're looking for a BRM role, these are kind of the questions to ask. I think it'd be really great if we could update that with the questions that you've been asked typically. So when you've been in interviews, what are people asking you? But then also what, as you said, what you've asked them to try and probe and try and gather what kind of BRM function you'll be moving into, what kind of business it is that you're moving into. So I think it'd be really nice if you could do a blog that we could share with people to let people know what you've been doing in an interview. Also how you've been preparing for it, what your process is, because it is a minefield. I'm sure everyone's doing this differently. And for a lot of people, I mean, me myself, I think I've had 3 interviews in my entire life. I've just been very lucky that I've kind of been promoted internally in places, and then the 2 or 3 times I've swapped, it was just a 1 interview. So I've been very, very lucky. If I had to go for an interview now, I definitely wouldn't know what hit me, because it would just be a totally different landscape. But I think there probably are people that may be in a similar position to me, that they've been inside a company, they've been promoted a couple of times, and now they've found themselves looking for a job, and it's like, okay, I don't know where to start. I'll go to a recruitment agency, maybe they can help. But I think it would be very challenging for some people over and above what you've gone through, which has been challenging enough. But if you've not had an interview for a long time, not changed role for a long time, I think having your experience, if we could have that down on paper so that someone can say, okay, this is what other people are doing, as it hasn't yielded a result yet, but it's got you well on your way there. And I'm confident that your dream role is just around the corner, James, and I'll be looking forward to celebrating that with you. But yeah, if we could share your process with people, I think that would be really helpful.
I'd be more than happy to do that, Mark, and I think that kind of brings me on to my kind of next couple of bits of advice. So and probably final bits, I think, but probably the most important. So the first thing is that despite having had probably more interviews now than I've had hot dinners, and I still have no doubt that I will get there. I just have that kind of full confidence in myself, even when there's been times in my career where I've felt like, for whatever reason, I've not been the best BRM that I could be, whether that be through, I don't know, whether because I've been demotivated for whatever reason. And that's quite unusual with me, because I have full faith in what BRM can do. So, that's been quite rare, or that might have been as a result of something else that's been going on within the organisation, perhaps. One of the things that I would say that I do, I have found on a few occasions, is that because I have moved around, people are a bit suspicious about that.
Right.
And the only thing that I can kind of say to that really is that when I've moved around, there has been a really good reason for it. So there have been scenarios which, again, I don't think anybody can hold against me too much. So where I have kind of reached that ceiling where it's become very clear that there is just simply no room for promotion, whether that be because of budget or whether that be because the structure is the way it is and there's no room to change, or even that people are kind of, or that I've got wind that a restructure is going to happen. And I don't like restructures for the very reason that I'm unemployed at the moment, is that I don't trust people. I don't fully trust people to be able to kind of make those decisions about my career for me. And I find that is quite kind of demotivating, and it does switch me off quite a lot. I know how good I am, and I think I've demonstrated it. But as the number of interviews that I've had, demonstrates, it's that it can be a bit of a lottery. So
yeah,
when I have moved around, that's been a few of the reasons why. It's also been because opportunities have come my way where it's a good opportunity to branch out and evolve and do something a bit different. And I think, again, that's no bad thing. Kind of diversifying and expanding your horizons and the industry you work in. When an organization restructures, they can do whatever they want and don't get any criticism. When a candidate wants to do something different, you're being a floozy or kind of not committed to the cause, But yeah, I never lose that kind of faith. I've never met a BRM, I don't think, in all my 8 years that hasn't been super passionate, hardworking, really trying to make a difference. And we've all kind of been at different levels or different steps of our career. But I think if you want to BRM, you have to be a certain type of person. I don't think I'm going to fake that. I'll bring you on to kind of one of my last bits of advice, which is probably one of the more amusing ones, but I genuinely think it helps. And it comes from a TED Talk, and I think it's one of the most watched TED Talks of all time, but it's about power poses before an interview.
Okay.
So the two ones that I do, and I think if I've got this right, the TED Talk, in fact, there's another TED Talk which I mentioned as well, but the recommendation is for around 2 minutes at a time on the kind of the day leading up to the interview, maybe an hour, half an hour before, do power poses. And I don't know on the podcast, but the one that I do is the kind of the hands on hips, chest puffed out, chin up, or the kind of the crossing the victory line arm there.
Okay.
And you have to hold that pose. I mean, you could do an Usain Bolt, I guess, if you want. If you hold that pose for around about 2 minutes, if I remember the science, basically it helps to kind of lower your cortisol levels and increase your confidence before. And one of my wife's friends said that she does it all the time. Well, the biggest thing that you can find is a space to do it before your interview. I had to go up to London to one recently, and I had to do it in the toilet, and they only had one. Also, must have been wondering what on earth was going on in there, but I was just doing my power poses. So imagine you're
Wonderful.
done, or you're scoring that try for England, or you win that trophy. That honestly massively helps. You can find that on TED. And then the other one is that you can do these mouth exercises, which I won't demonstrate now because it will, we'll just be rolling around on the floor laughing probably, which might not be. It talks about all of the kind of the mouth exercises that you can do to make sure you're coming across really clearly and coherently and all the rest of it. So yeah, give those things a go because again, I'm not succeeded yet, but they've definitely, it's felt like it's helped me.
Well, look, it's keeping you positive. You're still smiling. You're still confident. So all of these things combined are definitely helping you. But I think as you mentioned earlier, or as we spoke about, is that you do have to have confidence in yourself. You do have to kind of have trusted your own process. You got to where you were because of the kind of person you are and your efforts. So this one little bump in the road shouldn't define you. So just have confidence in you are. And yeah, I've seen kind of nightmare stories on LinkedIn where people have been looking for roles for a long time. But it does happen, and then you see the success story at the end of it. 9 times out of 10, these people have ended up in the best place they've ever been. So it's been a real tough road. But I think the harder the journey, the more rewarding it is when you get to the where you want it to be. So I'm sure that you'll continue to be optimistic and confident, and I hope people listening continue to be confident and optimistic. Never stop learning. See this whole process as a learning curve, and never stop taking information wherever you can. Everything, all these new bits of information you take are all helping you develop, and always lean on your community, and lean on other people as much as you can. So that would, I hope people continue to be, it can be difficult, but I just hope people can take inspiration from you, James, and just keep smiling, keep the confidence up, and it will happen.
Yeah, if anybody's in the same boat, Mark, I would encourage them to reach out to me, and we can share our woes together.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. Yeah,
we can take inspiration from each other. But I've got a lot of people to thank along the way. You've been a huge support. You're always checking in on me on how I'm getting.
It's a pleasure. Yeah.
I did my CBRM with you, which was amazing. And I do think that, I thought I knew everything, I thought I ran inside and out. And, as the relief showed on both of our faces, the hard mark for that, it proved that I definitely didn't know everything that there was to know, and that it is really difficult, but really rewarding. Having been made redundant at the time was particularly scary. I got let go on a Monday morning on a Teams call where the manager was there, and then all of a sudden a HR person parachuted in, and you get told that you're packing your bag. It's not a pleasant place to be, but in a way it has been really liberating. But you do need those kind of pillars of strength behind you, kind of keeping it going, because if you're not that type of person who's really positive and really believes in yourself, you do need those people to kind of push you on and keep you going. And when it is kind of saying, look, you're doing everything that you possibly can. And like you said, Mark, I see people all over LinkedIn who I've worked with who are absolutely brilliant people. If you see them in that situation and you think they're brilliant, for goodness sake, comment on LinkedIn and say how, because that will help them in the end. And if it doesn't help them with their prospective employer, it might just give them that little boost that they need to apply for that job that they don't think that they're going to get, or kind of get out of bed in the morning and keep going, because it is really
yeah, that's a really nice point, James.
Definitely take pride in what you've done, because if you don't give yourself a pat on the back, that there's not going to be a huge queue of people lining up to do it, and you really, you should start with you and kind of go out from it, I think. And yeah, like you said, reach out to your network, connect with people, and just say yes to things. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've lots of different jobs to kind of keep paying the bills, and some of them have been really tough. But yeah, would I change anything? Probably not. I really don't think I would. I've become a better business person since then. I've become a better human, I think. It sounds horribly cheesy, but I really do think.
Yes.
And yeah, I just know that whatever, like you say, whatever role is my next one will be, even if it's revisiting an organisation that I've already worked for, I know that I'll be in a better position because of it. And I've got opportunities to do this podcast, to volunteer with the BRMI, and I'm sure there'll be lots of opportunities that come from it. So yeah, that would be my main piece of advice to people, is keep going, for goodness sake. Don't give up on BRM, and actually it's really difficult to give up on BRM, because if you want to be a project manager, you have to have project management experience. So like with that one, you have all the transferable skills and all of the rest of it. It's so difficult. So keep going, have faith in BRM, because yeah, if it's a turbulent time out there in the wider world at the moment, both in terms of BRM and other IT roles, things will have to get better at some point. They really will. So hang in there, keep going, keep trying to pay those pesky bills, and yeah, it will happen for sure.
Thanks, James. And I really hope those listening, if they have comments or inputs or experiences to share, I would really appreciate that, because James, you've poured your heart and soul into this, but you've worn your heart on your sleeve, and I really appreciate it, because I think these kind of conversations are really helpful to people. So I really appreciate your time and offering to do this, and I hope we get some feedback from people listening, because I think that will also really help. So great. No, always a pleasure, James. Always a pleasure, and I wish you the best of luck, and I look forward to hearing some great news from you very soon.
We'll have to do a pod when I've got that job, and I can tell you all about it and how scared I am to be doing my new BRM role.
It's going to be a bit of conversation, and then 45 minutes of you just running around the room screaming, has it? With me doing the same.